In the realm of the physical, there's a clear separation between Jedi Knight Anakin Skywalker and the Sith Lord Darth Vader. Having sustained devastating injuries on Mustafar following his defeat to Obi-Wan Kenobi, in many ways, Anakin was reborn as Vader. From his lightsaber style, to leaving behind his former connections to the Jedi and Padme, to the physical changes through his suit and cybernetics, everything about Vader's new life was different from that of Anakin. But there is one aspect that isn't so clear as the physical transformation in regard to Vader following Mustafar, which is the Sith Lord's connection to the Force, and whether or not the injuries had the effect of making Vader weaker in the Force than he had been previously as Anakin Skywalker. In this video expose, I will explain whether losing flesh and limbs on Mustafar made Darth Vader weaker in the Force, describing it from the point of view of Darth Sidious and Vader himself, but also in regards to the effects in relation to midi-chlorians. The possible connection between Vader losing flesh and limbs and a corresponding decrease in his strength in the Force was one that was questioned by Vader himself following his perceived weakness after the events of Order 66 and his duel with Obi-Wan. From Vader's earliest thoughts on the matter, immediately following his injuries and the adoption of his new cybernetics, as seen within the Revenge of the Sith novelization and the novel Dark Lord: The Rise of Darth Vader, it seems clear that the injuries sustained by Vader did in fact weaken his strength in the Force. Although long, there's a great quote in the Revenge of the Sith novelization that provides us with an excellent perspective from Vader himself and how he perceived his own weakness regarding his connection to the Force after his surgery. The quote states, "And you rage and scream, and reach through the Force to crush the shadow who has destroyed you. But you are so far less now than what you were. You are more than half machine. You are like a painter gone blind, a composer gone deaf. You can remember where the power was, but the power you can touch is only a memory. And so with all your world-destroying fury, it is only droids around you that implode, and equipment, and the table on which you were strapped shatters." As the novelization makes clear, Vader found there to be a discernible difference in regard to his Force power before Mustafar and after Mustafar, finding that he was so far less than he'd been before his injuries. Even more than that, the power that was seemingly available to be used by Vader, if he could ever figure out how to tap into it, was only a memory. This clear difference and perceived weakening in his abilities with the Force is continued early on in the Rise of Darth Vader novel. Again, Vader was not only completely uncertain of his place in the Force only weeks after Mustafar, but he recognized an inability to sustain its power. Vader saw himself as having been stripped of everything he had, including his strength in the Force. Whereas he'd viewed himself as almost all-powerful, and would have immediately challenged Sidious for the position as ruler of the galaxy before his injuries, he now recognized that he lacked the power that had formerly been available to Anakin Skywalker, forcing him to ask, "With the loss of my limbs, have I also lost strength in the Force?" With all of this evidence from the early hours and days following Mustafar, it seems as though we can answer Vader's own question in only one way: that losing flesh and limbs through his injuries on Mustafar did cause him to be weaker in the Force. Well, not quite. The perspective that we were provided from Darth Sidious and later from Vader in the Rise of Darth Vader novel not only explains why Vader wasn't made weaker in his connection to the Force after losing his limbs on Mustafar, but also explains Vader's initial perceived weakness just mentioned. Importantly, although Sidious recognized that he had not foreseen his apprentice with the physical injuries that now plagued him, and that this would limit him in some respects when looking at the former physical abilities of Anakin, in no way did Sidious view his apprentice as a failure or now weaker when it came to the Force. For Sidious, there was still no one in the galaxy who was even half as powerful in the Force as Vader, nor would there ever be. Sidious recognized that one day, Vader had the potential to surpass even him in regard to his strength with the Force. Importantly, Sidious understood the true reason for his apprentice's temporary weakness, and more importantly, he knew how to get Vader to not only regain his former strength, but to surpass it. As the novel makes clear, there was no correlation between the loss of flesh and limbs and a loss in one's connection to the Force. As Sidious states in Rise of Darth Vader, Sith power resided not in the flesh, but in the will. Vader's real weaknesses were psychological, rather than physical, and for Vader to overcome them, he would need to be driven deeper into himself, to confront all of his choices and his disappointments. Therefore, Sidious understood that the loss of limbs, and really we should say the loss of the midi-chlorians that comprise the cells of Vader's flesh and limbs, is not what was weakening Vader's connection to the Force. Rather, Vader's problems were psychological, as an individual who was trapped between worlds, not fully committed to the Sith and dark side, and not fully deprived of his connections to the life of Anakin Skywalker. What Vader really lacked was a commitment to the dark side, but also the self-confidence that had once been natural to him as Anakin. Once Vader made that leap, the loss of his limbs and flesh would not hold back his true strength in the Force. And that is exactly what happened in the early weeks of Vader's tutelage under Sidious. With Vader having learned to let go of his singular focus on revenge against the Jedi, and having become covetous of Sidious's knowledge and power, the Sith Lord regained his place and strength in the Force, and was arguably more powerful than at any point prior to his Mustafar injuries. Note Vader's newfound invulnerability and strength only weeks after the rise of the Empire, when he defeated a Jedi, yes, but more importantly, when he learned to let go of his bloodlust and dedicated himself fully to the dark side. More important, Vader's bloodlust had been appeased, replaced by self-possession of a sort he had never before experienced. It was as if he had crossed some invisible threshold to a new world. He could feel the power of the dark side surging through him like an icy torrent. He felt invulnerable in a way that had nothing to do with his suit of armor and gadgets, which now seemed like little more than an outfit. Therefore, Vader was no longer the painter gone blind or composer gone deaf. He regained his place and power in the Force, and in many ways exceeded the strength that had been known to Anakin. The perceived weaknesses of Vader were correctly understood by Sidious, and once Vader got over the psychological hurdles that plagued him after Mustafar, he once again regained his strength in the Force, despite the fact that he'd lost limbs and received devastating injury to his flesh. This makes sense from the point of view of midi-chlorians as well. Although Vader certainly lost cells that contained midi-chlorians, which of course were the intelligent microscopic lifeforms that allowed their carriers to detect the cosmic energy field known as the Force, and which is linked to one's Force potential, it must be remembered that Force potential through one's midi-chlorian count is measured on a per-cell basis, and not the total present within one's body. If it was the other way around, and Force potential was measured by the total midi-chlorians present, it would get much more confusing than it already is, as beings with low per-cell midi-chlorian counts, but many cells, would have a greater Force potential than those with a high per-cell midi-chlorian count, but fewer overall cells. Suffice it to say, even putting aside Sidious's quote that Sith power and Force ability were not found within the flesh, even though Vader lost a significant amount of cells containing midi-chlorians, the cells that he continued to have after Mustafar still contained their high midi-chlorian count of over 20,000 per cell, ensuring Vader still had a significant connection to the Force. So there we have it. Why losing flesh and limbs on Mustafar did not make Darth Vader weaker in the Force than Anakin Skywalker. We love making these videos, so why not subscribe for more fun Star Wars theories and discussions? Also, if you enjoyed the video, think about giving a like or leaving a comment. If not for me... for Sith Psychiatry.